My name's Laura Sims, and I'm a South Orange resident and a writer, and this is my first novel, Looker. It came out last year in January, and I'm excited to talk to you about it today. Looker is about a woman whose life has spiraled out of control. Her husband has left her. She has wanted to have children and couldn't have them. She's got kind of a dead-end teaching job that she's not happy with, and basically her life is falling apart. And as that's happening, she lives in Brooklyn, although it's not named, but it is Brooklyn. And she happens to live down the street from a famous actress. And she's always been interested in her and kind of aware of her and her extreme privilege and the kind of bubble that she lives in. But as this woman's life kind of crumbles, she begins to watch her more closely and become increasingly obsessed, and then she begins to act out, and that's kind of where the story begins. Looker was inspired by my own living situation when I was living in Brooklyn, and there are a lot of celebrities around with their families, and it always struck me that, of course, there are all kind of societal strata in New York City living right up next to each other, and that's always obvious. But it really struck me thinking about celebrities and the uber wealthy who live in the city, and how basically they live in an entirely different universe than the other residents of the city. And so that really interested me. And there was one day when I was walking home from the grocery, and I was like carrying all these bags. It was August, I was sweating, miserable. And one of these beautiful people walked by, and she looked so composed and like she just stepped out of a spa or something. And I just had this moment of bitterness and envy. And this voice came into my head, and it was the voice of my narrator, who is very bitter and envious. And I, went home and started writing the book kind of in a feverish state, almost like it was a journal. So I was like journaling this woman's thoughts, and that's where it started. Especially in our social media saturated age, I think it's a lot, even though actually in the book there is not a lot of social media. All of the envy and watching and obsessing takes place live, but that's something that New York City in particular allows. But I think in our social media saturated age, it's so easy to look at other people and think, wow, they've got everything I could ever want. I will never be like that person. Everything's perfect for them. Things are not great for me. So I think we are walking around projecting all the time. Most of us, thankfully, don't take it a step further the way my narrator does. But I think it's a really common practice, especially now. There was really no thinking behind that. It was kind of an instinctual thing that I did. Looking back on it now, reflecting on it now, it fits for the story because, the narrator feels herself to be less than and kind of nothing and erased almost by the actress's magnificence. So it kind of makes sense that she would be nameless. She thinks of herself that way and sees herself in society in that way because she, has lost her place as a married person in this family-oriented neighborhood. She doesn't have children, and she, wanted them. And then for the actress, she's also referred to as the actress, right? And I think that fits for her because, again, with the narrator projecting onto her, all she sees is the actress, like this incredible person with this perfect life. So she also doesn't really deserve a name, a reality, at least from the narrator's perspective. think of it as a thriller either. It was sometimes marketed that way, or people had expectations of it to be a thriller. And sometimes those expectations were disappointed because it does not follow a lot of the thriller tropes, especially towards the end. There's no like tidy bow at the end where everything is solved and resolved for the reader. And so I definitely, and I don't even know if it was conscious, but I was playing with the tropes of the thriller novel, but I also wanted to kind of overturn some of those tropes and, not really write a thriller, but also play with some of those elements that I find really compelling. Yeah, I have both taken and taught. I have an MFA in poetry. So I've been through a creative writing workshop, although she's teaching a literature class that's kind of focused on poetry as literature, although they do some writing in the class. So I have taught classes like that kind of are hybrid classes. I've been in classes like that. So I have a lot of experience, and the book is not based on any reality, but it is, a really kind of special classroom situation where you are sharing these really intense works of literature, and it opens the door to vulnerability and intimacy. So I found that it was like a really kind of a great little petri dish for my narrator to exist in. And there's some trouble that comes out of that petri dish. Let's see. Well, in particular for this book, I feel like a couple of books really planted the, idea in my head, even if I wasn't aware of it. But I read Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante when it came out in the States, and just was blown away by something that I hadn't really read a lot of, which was a first-person female narrator raging, and in this beautiful, like, raw way that I just loved. And so I think that made a huge impression on me as a writer. Also, Jenny Offel's Department of Speculation was another big influence for this book, both in its like smallness, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but like it's a slim novel, but she accomplishes so much in that slim novel in these little bits of prose. It's collage-like, but it also has a narrative that carries you along. So I really wanted to, I think, I emulated that with this narrative. Like, I wanted it to be told in this kind of fragmented way that reflected the narrator's fragmented state of mind, but also to have this narrative that carries the reader along and makes you want to see what happens. So that book really inspired me. In general, I have so many favorite authors. One of my favorites is David Markson. And he is like an experimental writer, novelist, who really took the collage form of the novel to its extreme, and I think to its highest degree, where he stripped back plot and character and all of these things that we generally rely on in a novel to kind of carry us through. But they're still really compelling and beautiful works of fiction. So he's one of my all-time favorites. And I love autofiction. So I read, Rachel Cusk is one of my favorites, Ben Lerner's novels. I recently read a book called Breasts and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami, which was like Japanese autofiction. I loved that. I love a lot of Japanese literature. I spent time in Japan after college. I lived there for several years and have always loved literature and translation from there. Always did. I mean, as far as back as I can remember, since I was 5 or 6, I was writing stories. I have a little book that I that I wrote when I was 5 or 6 with stories and poems and essays and terrible pictures. And that was my first book. So yes, I was always writing, and I had written fiction a lot when I was younger. And then I kind of really switched to poetry and decided that I was a poet. So I didn't write fiction for many years until, not with Looker. I had started writing fiction again before Looker, but it was kind of a later in life choice for me to go back to fiction. I mean, I have always loved libraries. I grew up in my local library because my parents were divorced, and my dad would take me on Saturdays to our local library in downtown Richmond, Virginia, and kind of deposit me in the children's section. And I just spent hours there on the weekends. I mean, I already loved reading and even writing when I was young. And there was a great librarian there, Mrs. Gloria Nottingham, still remember her full name. And she would give me books and recommend books. And so I think that really imprinted on me early, that it was a great job, first of all, because you got to recommend books to people and encourage reading and be this space too for the public to come and be safe and read. And so it's always been a really special and important place for me. And so I think it was 4 years ago, because I know it took me 4 years to get this degree. I was very slow, but 4 years ago, I kind of had this moment where I had been doing adjunct teaching, which I loved, as a creative writing teaching, and I taught literature at NYU to adult students who were returning students getting their degrees. And I really loved it, but I knew that it was not a sustainable thing, because there's, very little money in adjunct teaching and very little security. And I also kind of wanted a change. So I thought, and I had thought about getting a master's in library science before, but that was kind of a moment for me where I thought, okay, maybe it's time to switch, and while I'm still teaching, get this degree. So. Great. Everyone is so supportive. We're kind of recent transplants here. We've now been here for 2 years, but when my book came out, a year and a half ago, we were pretty recent residents, but everyone from neighbors to the library and the writing community here has been incredibly welcoming and supportive. And I've really, really enjoyed it. Going from Brooklyn, where there are so many writers, and it's kind of hard to form a community in that huge environment, although of course I found writers there. But it's nice to be in this smaller community where there are a lot of serious writers, and it's just kind of easier to spot them and find them. And so yeah, I found it really wonderful.